Mission Atlantic, to ensure a sustainable future for the Atlantic Ocean. Integrated Ecosystem Assessment, or IEA, is a holistic approach to managing ecosystems by evaluating the cumulative impacts of natural variation and human activities. It follows an IEA loop that starts with scoping the system, together with stakeholders developing indicators, analysing the risks from and to different parts of the system, testing potential future scenarios under natural and anthropogenic change, and refine focuses on revising and improving the assessments based on the outcomes and insights gained from earlier stages in the cycle. This process helps balance trade-offs between ecological health, social well-being, and economic viability, ensuring sustainable use and conservation of ecosystem services. The initial phase is called scoping, which involves engaging with stakeholders to identify challenges to the system and to define objectives. This sets the foundation by outlining the study's scope, goals, and priorities to ensure relevance and targeted assessment. In this video, we dive deeper into how each of these steps in the IEA fit together to address ecosystem-based management. Our guide, Debbi, introduces us to the why, what, how, and who of IEAs. Using an example from Mission Atlantic, Debbi also shows how the knowledge and analyses set up within an IEA can be utilised to respond to generate advice in future circumstances.
Hello everyone, my name is Debbi Pedreschi and I work at the Marine Institute in Ireland, and today I'm going to give you an introduction to integrated ecosystem assessment on behalf of the Mission Atlantic project. So the context for integrated ecosystem assessment, or IEA, is ecosystem-based management. And despite many national and international mandates for ecosystem-based management, there is no universally agreed definition. So asking ChatGPT, it tells us that it's about the conservation and sustainable use of entire ecosystems. Then we need to take into account the complex interactions and interdependencies between the different species, habitats, and human activities in order to try and achieve and maintain the health, resilience, and functionality of ecosystems while also meeting the needs of society. Well, we live in a complex world. This is an illustration, a herendogram of the legislation just pertaining to marine protection. This is another herendogram where across the top you can see all the different sectors that are affecting our marine environment. Across the middle are the different pressures, and at the bottom are the parts of the ecosystem that are affected by those pressures. And then the parts of the ecosystem also interact with each other through food webs and ecological interactions. And so you have interactions between each one of these very complex systems where the legislation dictates what can happen at sea. Those activities create different pressures that affect parts of the ecosystem, and those parts of the ecosystem all interact with one another. So how can we account for everything? In addition, this is supposed to be a whole systems approach. So we're not just looking at the ecosystem and the ecological aspects, but also the social and economic components, for example. So we need to take into account what are the benefits of the ecosystem services that we obtain from these ecosystems, what are the social processes or the activities that are going on that are affecting that marine environment as well. And of course, society is diverse with many different perspectives on what is acceptable or desirable or not. And on top of that, nothing is static, everything is changing, and everything seems to be very urgent, particularly at the moment. So how can we account for everything? Well, one way is through integrated ecosystem assessment. And to me, it does exactly what it says on the tin. It's an integrated assessment of the whole ecosystem. So we're talking about all of the different sectors and pressures, all of the different parts of the ecosystem, including the humans, how we act upon it, and what the direct and indirect interactions are there, and the social, economic, and ecosystem services that come out of this. As such, it's a tool for ecosystem-based management. But it's also a process. Integrated ecosystem assessment is an iterative process involving a number of steps that are arranged into a cycle like you can see around my head here. The first of which is scoping to determine what are the elements that should be included in our assessment, be they relevant management objectives, what are the human activities, what are the parts of the ecosystem that should be included, and importantly, what scale are we operating at. Next, we look at indicators to be able to assess what are the status and drivers of these ecosystems and of the social system as well, and what are the resilience of these systems. We carry out risk analyses in order to be able to identify the areas that are most at risk or most vulnerable, where the largest threats are occurring in our system, and prioritise our efforts towards those. We then carry out scenario testing to be able to simulate changes in these systems, be them from environmental drivers or from socioeconomic drivers, and to identify how these may affect, or to test out management scenarios in response to the objectives that have been specified at the beginning. And importantly, there is also this refine and assessment step that we identify if we have managed to answer the questions that we set out to answer. We evaluate the management options that have been provided to see if they have been effective, and if not, why not. And if all of that is all good, we can then move forward into scoping again to see what are the new issues or different areas of focus that we need to address and that can be tackled through integrated ecosystem assessment. To do this, we need a range of different tools and methods depending on which aspects we're looking at. So you can see a simplified ecosystem on the slide here. It has influences and impacts coming both from the human and from society side, but also from the environment itself. So depending on what we're looking at will dictate which tools we use, and these are just some examples of the types of tools we have used within Mission Atlantic. So for example, for the human impacts, we can use scoping with stakeholders. We may use tools like conceptual modelling to do this. We identify the emerging issues with them. We may carry out risk assessments to kind of triage and identify what are priority areas that we need to focus our efforts on. We can look at developing socioeconomic indicators and identifying what trade-offs may be occurring. When we're looking at the environmental influences, we may use methods like integrated trend analysis, identifying early warning signals and breakpoints within the system, identifying the relevant indicators and thresholds for those indicators, and the drivers that are influencing the system. Of course, we also want to know about their interactions from both the environment and the human side. And so we're looking at a range of physical, chemical, and biological models using statistical and mechanistic methods as appropriate to the question or the challenge that we're trying to address. And you'll see in other videos in this series details of multiple examples of those methods that are used within Mission Atlantic. You can think of the multi-step process of IEA as the steps of a ladder. So we start off quite wide-ranging. We're looking at the who and the where of the IEA. So being very all-inclusive, what are the relevant components? What should be taken into consideration? What are the relevant goals and targets and objectives that we need to consider? As we move up the steps of the ladder, we move on to the what of the IEA. So what should we focus on? Where's the vulnerability and the risk? What are the elements that we need to prioritize for our assessments? And as we move to this top rung, we're looking at the why of the IEA. So what is the question that has come from our stakeholders? What's the answer that we need to work towards providing? Where are the trade-offs that we are examining? The reason for doing the assessment that we are currently looking at. In addition, we start off at this lower level, at this lower rung, very qualitative, because we often don't have all of the information or data available to be able to look at all of these individual components. But as we move through this process, the methods and the approaches become more quantitative as we focus down into being able to answer these specific questions that are posed by stakeholders. Within Mission Atlantic, we are carrying out integrated ecosystem assessment throughout the Atlantic Ocean through a number of case studies, as you can see listed here. For the example I'm about to present, I'll focus on the Celtic Sea case study, as that's the one that I lead and therefore know best. Within the Celtic Sea case study area, we have carried out this cycle. So we've had 4 stakeholder meetings to date. We've identified 17 sectors, 20 pressures, and 26 ecological components of relevance to this region. We have scoped with the stakeholders what their key issues and concerns are, and we have built a conceptual model with the stakeholders to identify the linkages and understand the interactions between them. We've then carried out a range of indicator-related work around trend analyses, early warning analyses, and breakpoint analyses in order to better understand what are the key signals that are coming from the environment. Next, we carry out risk analyses, so identifying and understanding the linkages between the different sectors, pressures, and ecological components. These are all scored so that they can be ranked and prioritized so that we can identify what are the sectors or pressures that are contributing the most impact or have the most risk associated with them within our ecosystem of interest. Then we move into the scenario testing, where we work to test the scenarios or answer the questions that have been specified by the stakeholders using a range of models. In this case, we've been using the Strata end-to-end model, we've been using the conceptual model built with the stakeholders, and we've been using Bayesian belief networks. Because IEA is an applied method, we need to work directly with stakeholders so that we can understand their needs and work to address them. Within the Celtic Sea case study, we had a diverse stakeholder group that had members from various industries, from the environmental sector, from management agencies, scientific advisors, and also research institutes. And together we built an understanding of the system using conceptual modelling, and there'll be another video that goes into that in a bit more detail. We also, through this process, were able to identify what the emerging issues were and further refine these down to scenarios that could then be implemented within the models that we were using in the project. Within the Celtic Sea case study, those scenarios are related to the interactions between offshore renewable energy, fisheries, and the expansion of marine protected areas. So hopefully by now you have a better understanding of what integrated ecosystem assessment is, how it's used, and what it's used for. But you might also be interested in who uses it. Within the US, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, has an established integrated ecosystem assessment program, which also results in the productions of its ecosystem status reports. In the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea, or ICES, they have an established integrated ecosystem assessment steering group that lead to the production of the ecosystem overviews, which are advice products it provides to its clients. In both cases, integrated ecosystem assessment is directly contributing to ecosystem advice, as these outputs feed off the IEA processes and methods in order to produce these valuable outputs, which provide essential contextual ecosystem information required for ecosystem-based management. So, where to from here? As we've seen, IEA is made up of an iterative series of steps, and this leads us to having a series of analyses and living documents that are updated as knowledge is updated or becomes available. But organizing it into this kind of IEA framework can allow us to have rapid responses to specific EBM questions. On a national example, I was asked if there were non-fisheries pressures acting upon the fish resource. This was in support of the Marine Strategy Framework Directive Descriptor 3 Commercial Fish Assessment. And I was able to answer them within 24 hours to tell them how many pressures were acting on the resource, what level they were acting at, what scale they were acting at, and so on. And so this is a powerful tool, and we expect with the ongoing work within Mission Atlantic, future iterations may allow us to have rapid response maps, be able to give us insights into cumulative impacts, ecosystem service effects, and potential socioeconomic trade-offs. We know that there are increasing demands and needs for ecosystem-informed science and advice in order to advance ecosystem-based management. And a part of this is the need for more information around trade-offs and being able to identify and quantify them. The mandate for ecosystem-based management to date has led to the adoption of integrated ecosystem assessment as an approach to deliver on EBM by NOAA and by ICES. We also know that to ensure useful applied outcomes, we need to engage directly with stakeholders, including managers and policymakers, in order to identify the relevant questions and issues that can be addressed in order to progress ecosystem-based management. We also know that EBM requires interdisciplinary teams delivering on transdisciplinary science and advice. IEA provides us with an adaptable and iterative approach to integrate multiple methods and data streams, to identify and integrate multiple perspectives and trade-offs, to facilitate meaningful stakeholder engagement, to ask and answer complex questions, to work multidisciplinarily in order to produce transdisciplinary outcomes, and most importantly, to operationalize ecosystem-based management and provide ecosystem-informed advice. This is the way that we can deliver the science that we need for the ocean that we want and make progress towards ecosystem-based management. Thank you very much for your attention and your interest. I hope this has been useful and informative for you. Don't forget to check out the other videos in this series to learn more about IEA and IEA methods.